This is Inspiring Design, where unique innovators come together to share their knowledge, share their insight, and keep us up to date with the latest industry trends. And here's your host, Rushan Senanayake.
What's up, listeners? Welcome to a brand new episode of Inspiring Design Season 2. I'm your host, Rushan Senanayake, and we're kicking on with design thinking our way through different students' points of view, students and graduates, I must say, design thinking our way through the education and design industries, featuring people from all over Australia, different backgrounds, different experience levels and points of views in their education and professional career. So to kick things off today, I have here actually a very special guest, and I'm going to share a story later on how she was actually influential in the birth of inspired education, Kaitlin Sells. She's worked in the architectural industry throughout her university studies. She's honed her skills in not only design and construction, but also project management, leading her to take on roles outside the typical architectural job description. We're essentially talking about creative thinking way through different parts of the business development, and so on. She was given the opportunity to take on more BD roles while working simultaneously on leadership positions within networking organizations as well. Being a strong advocate for relationship first type approach to projects, Kaitlin believes that many of these skills are transferable across various industries and help her build her knowledge set and skill sets, which made her a very unique and employable person. So let's get into it. Welcome to the show, Kaitlin.
Thanks so much for having me. I feel very privileged to be on.
Awesome. Can we start off with a little bit of background on yourself? What's your history? What's your story?
So I studied a Masters of, I suppose first of all a Bachelor of Design that then led into a Masters of Architecture. It was, I suppose, interesting in the fact that it's something, or becoming an architect is something I've always wanted to do. It's something that I was very fortunate to have very clear direction on when I was younger. So I was the kid at school that, instead of coming home from school and drawing horses or whatever 7-year-old girls draw, I would draw floor plans.
Wow.
And it was just kind of this thing that I loved doing, and it was a hobby, and it was great. And kind of tie that in with how I grew up. So my parents, we moved a lot with my dad's work. So I've lived in Sydney. I've spent 4 years over in the States over there, moved schools a ridiculous number of times, I don't even count, and moved houses a lot as a result of that. And so would spend my childhood going to open homes and, builders and things like that. And just became really interested in design, I guess. So fast forward, a couple of years, I've been doing these floor plans at home, and Mum said to me one day, she was just like, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I was like, "I want to be an interior designer. That's it."
Wow.
And she said, "Oh, but you're really maths and science and numbers sort of focused, And she was the one that actually said to me, she was like, "I think you should be an architect." And I was like, "Okay, cool."
Okay.
Just ran with that, and pretty much, since the age of sort of 10 years old, I think that was kind of what I did.
Yep.
So I went through high school and pretty much picked all my subjects based on the plan of going to uni and studying architecture. So did graphics, visual arts, that sort of thing, to kind of combine, I suppose, the technical and the creative side of things. And then, and ended up in uni at QUT and started first year and absolutely hated it. Remember...
Any particular reason?
I spent I distinctly remember spending so many nights in tears because it was not practical. And first year is all about being creative, and it really is teaching you to think in a non-linear way and outside the box, which I couldn't truly appreciate until after uni, that how important that actually was. But at the time I was like, where's the rules? Where's the the facts around this?
The
this
structure.
is so this is so airy-fairy and I hate it. And I was like, so I stuck out the first year, and it was really at the beginning of second year, I was like, do I keep going? This is rubbish. And I thought, no, I'm going to go and try and get a job, and I'm going to see what that's like. And if I'm happy with the job, then I'll keep going with uni. So in second year, I went and got a part-time job in a firm, and pretty much started working at the time it was about 3 days a week, and then doing uni the rest of the time.
So you were studying full-time and doing 3 days a week?
Yeah.
That's more than a full-time work.
And it was hectic, and particularly in the later kind of years when I was working sort of 4 days a week towards the end. And but yeah, it was good because it gave me that dose of reality that I needed, and allowed me to come back and go, yeah, this is actually what I want to do. I want to spend my time investing in this. And it also gave me that appreciation for actually, even though uni sometimes doesn't have those boundaries, it is good. It's teaching me to think differently, and especially for someone like me that is very linear, numbers orientated, math, science background, that sort of thing. I think it was good. So
yeah, awesome.
So that's a bit about me.
There you go. Now, how did you choose what majors, and essentially once you had chosen architecture, how did you choose the complementing majors to go with it during your studies?
That's an interesting one. I feel like I did urban design, so I suppose more the council and the planning side of things. Yeah. And I've always kind of enjoyed that big picture sort of stuff. Yeah. So master planning was something in particular that I was always very interested in, how architecture fit into the bigger scheme of, its environment and cities and that sort of thing. So I did that. I'm pretty sure that's all I did. I don't think I did.
So it was a second major?
Yeah, it was a second major. That's right. I didn't do another one to go with it. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. And it was similar to I think most students try to think of themselves as what's the element that allows them to differentiate themselves from everyone else.
Exactly.
That second major to add to that and complement.
Exactly. And that course actually was, even though I didn't do it full time or anything, it actually still taught me a lot about how the industry works beyond the realms of architecture. So actually how it functions and how buildings come into play from a I suppose more a legal point of view. Yeah. And all the planning that actually goes in behind it, and actually taught me to realize that architecture does not operate in isolation as much as sometimes we love to think it does. Yeah. It really is part of a bigger context, and sometimes your ideas do need to not necessarily be conform to that, but respect what else is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now, obviously, we're here to talk about how architecture has helped you in leadership roles and BD roles. Yes. How did that first manifest itself, just so that the listeners can understand how you got to where you are? Yep. How did you get into BD in the first place?
Well, I suppose I might start with what BD was for me. So I suppose in my role there was two main different sides of it. So there's BD in your typical sense that you're developing the business and you're progressing it and you're wanting it to move forward. And I suppose in my role there was also the management side of things. So there was certainly a level of keeping the business where it was and making sure that it was functioning at a certain level and a certain capacity to allow us to continue to move forward. Yep. So it kind of combined those two things. As I said, I started working in second year, and I suppose that allowed me to kind of get a really good grasp on projects and how they were run and that sort of thing pretty early on the piece, which was great. And I was very, very fortunate in the sense I had an employer that was very willing to just throw me in the deep end and see how I go. Yeah. And, she was obviously there to back me up, which was great. But at the end of the day, it fell on me, and how far I wanted to go and how far I wanted to take that was in my control. Yeah. So I got to a point where pretty much by sort of third, fourth year, I was running my own projects, and that particular firm in essence, it wasn't, I suppose, what you'd call a design firm. So it was more about they still delivered good quality products, but it was definitely more about the volume and making architecture essentially more accessible to the everyday person. Yeah. So it wasn't a firm where we had 3 projects a year. It was definitely a firm where we, you know, for a small team, we had about 40 houses on the go at once. And so there was a lot of quantity, and there was a lot of balancing and juggling and time management and everything involved in that. So leading on from that, I got to the point where I was kind of able to run my own projects, even though I wasn't necessarily there full time. And then the BD role really started once I left uni, because then I was working full time, and I was able to take on more. And with that extra time, I was obviously already managing my own projects, and I got the opportunity to fill that in with, and I suppose supplement that with being more involved in the business. And I think where it kind of all started was I was always very interested in what the director in particular was doing. So it was a small company, so we were all kind of, you know, you knew what was going on in the business, and you knew when we were busy and what was going on, and when we needed to scale back, and, you know, when we needed to go find new clients, you know. So because of that, I suppose I saw opportunities, and I'm naturally the type of person to ask questions. So I started, and I just started by saying, I want to come along to a prospective meeting. And that's kind of where it all grew from. And so she said, yep, that's fine. Love to have you come along. So I went along to a couple of prospective meetings, and, you know, saw how that sort of relationship building really started from, and then kind of took it from there. So she let me start doing my own meetings, start basically being responsible for bringing in work into the company. And it eventually got to a point where she said, if you're going to do this, you need to prove that it's going to be worthwhile for me to have you doing this. So then that led into, okay, well, I need to start a way to track this, essentially. So I need to start looking at my conversion rates and how this is all, you know, going to pan out, and how much time am I spending on this compared to my actual jobs, and making sure that my actual projects are not distracted. Yeah, exactly. So it kind of just started like that. And then we got to a point where she said, yeah, your conversion rate's great. You know, it was funny. It was better than hers. But she wasn't sad about that. She was like, this is great. This works for the business, and you've got the skills here. So just go for it. So then I took on, and I was like, well, I'm going to make the most of this. So joined a couple of networking groups and started building relationships with people outside the industry. So I spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, well, in the bigger scheme of things, where are people finding us? You know, they're coming from real estate agents, they're coming from builders, they're coming from town planners if they're developers. You know, where are these leads actually coming from? And then that led into actually looking at, okay, well, we're getting these leads in. How can we make it not such a time-consuming process? So in terms of our marketing strategy, what are we doing? And, you know, can we sort of make it automated in some ways? And everything kind of just, I suppose, continued to grow to the point that, you know, I was all these things are naturally interlinked, and then it was looking at how profitable things are and the profit margins in the business, and making sure that, you know, the fees we had set on projects were still aligned and you know, working. So that kind of leads into where I was saying about how it ended up being this sort of management side where we're sustaining what we've got, but also making sure that we're progressing and looking at the marketing and looking at the strategy and looking at what work's coming in and what work's going out, and making sure we've got enough there for the future, and sort of forecasting.
Yeah, wow. So obviously that was within a few years after going out of uni. Yeah,
correct. Yeah.
How did that feel?
It was stressful. I'm not going to lie. So it was a very high pressure job. It was funny because I loved it. I suppose there was a little bit of adrenaline associated with it, and I was never bored because it was constantly go, go, go. And it meant that I probably on most days only spent maybe 3 hours at a desk, if that. And it meant I had built, you know, people within the company to support me running those projects, so that all the projects that we already had, so that I could essentially just be the face to the client and be the contact point, and, you know, come in and review the work. So it kind of built the business to a point where, you know, there was the director, and then there was myself, and then we had, you know, teams of people to support us. So in some ways they were all little businesses within the main business. And there's pros and cons to that structure, you know, and there's pros and cons. I think it's it's definitely a matter of who you've got in your business and if that works for the people that you've got. But it did work for that business, and it was great. But it was stressful and it was very time consuming, and you'd get phone calls from clients at 9 o'clock at night.
Oh, wow.
And you'd be checking your emails all the time because you don't have enough time at your desk and and that sort of stuff. But that's just kind of the nature of it, and I really did enjoy it.
Well, that's honestly impressive given the shorter timeline that this has happened. Usually people are doing those kinds of roles in their 40s or late 30s.
And I think it's a combination of definitely being interested in it and driven in it, because I know, I see some of my friends and they're not interested in it. You know, I talk about what I did and they're just like, that's horrible. Why would you even do that? But I also know that there's probably a handful of people out there that would really love that. And it's a combination of being interested in it, but also who you're working for and who gives you that opportunity. And if it is something that you're interested in, making sure you're creating that opportunity for yourself.
It sounds like you had an incredible mentor as a start to allow that to even, take place.
I definitely did.
Some directors wouldn't be open to that.
No, not at all. And she had a great deal of trust in me, which of course is built over time as well. But I think she could see that I could handle it, but she was also there to support me when I was going, okay, this is a lot. I need some assistance. I need some backup. This is too much. Especially in a company like that where there was such a high volume of projects. It might be different in a company that is more design focused and, you're not having necessarily that high turnover. But,
No, that's excellent. Now, I want to take some time to actually drill down into what the common factors are about these transferable skills. Now, I know that it's a similar mindset that I've approached the thinking in architecture, having gone through that design-focused creative problem-solving method and then applying that to business, whether it's BD, whether it's marketing, whether it's sales, whether it's HR, whatever. And it's the same thing that I actually do in Inspired Education. And I wanted to ask you, how did the learnings did you know it was the actual creative problem solving that was the underlying foundation of your success in all of these different attributes, or was that kind of subconscious? How did that manifest itself?
I think I probably didn't know at the beginning, but I think over time I became more aware of it. So for me, it was when I reflect on that now and how that all kind of manifested. I think of sort of creative thinking and design thinking in particular as it's cyclical and it's not linear, and there's a couple of different facets to it. There's particularly the sort of empathy and putting yourself in someone else's shoes and being able to relate to that, and then transferring that to what you're creating. And then for me, there's also a testing element to it. So that's why I say it's cyclical, because I think, once you get to the testing, you've kind of got to go back to that stakeholder and start again. So if I use an example of, okay, let's say I've got to go win some work and I've got to put food on the table for everyone in the business. At the end of the day, I'm trying to sell a service to a client. So in that moment, when I go to someone's house, it was a residential firm, and I would be asking them about what they're wanting. One of the things that I would constantly test and change was the way I spoke to them, because it was, okay, well, let me understand your issues. Let me try and come up with solutions that it's only the first meeting, I'm not going to scare you, but at the same time, prove or show you rather that we've got the skills to do it. And then sometimes that would work. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it works with certain personalities. Other times it doesn't. So it's then taking that, seeing the reaction I get from people, testing and trying again. And so I think...
So empathy, collaboration, experimentation.
Pretty much, yeah. And then there was also, okay, that's the, I suppose, meeting people, having that face-to-face interaction. There's also what their experience is like before and after that. So before, there's marketing. So what are we going to do? What works? So let's take Facebook advertising or Instagram advertising or something to begin with. What are we putting out there? What's the response? What's the feedback? Are we tracking that? Is it working? And then testing and trying again. What do the people that we want to capture actually want to see from us? Do they want to see our work? Do they want to be educated by us? We very much took a strategy that was about education, and that was twofold. That was to obviously support the clients through the process, but it also worked for us in the fact that clients were more educated about what they were getting into, and therefore made the process once they signed up with us easier and smoother. So from that point of view, there's the before, and then there's also the after, which is what their experience is throughout, working with us and being in design or construction drawings, or in construction, what that meant for them.
Yeah.
So there was definitely a couple of models and changes that we did within the business that was, okay, we're taking the clients through sketch design. Is it we present them hand drawns? Do we present them 3D images? Is it a combination of both? How do we present this in a meeting? Do we do videos and send that to them and then get them engaged? What does that experience look like? What gets them the best result, but also what helps us from an efficiency point of view and that side of things as well. So it definitely applies throughout the whole process. And like I said, I wasn't aware of that at the beginning. But it became more and more clear as we went on.
And that's the beautiful part. And I think what gave me the confidence and what brought me to attention to this, it was very similar to yourself, where it's not something that you're aware of because you're studying architecture, so you think you're going to be an architectural expert and get registered one day. And I actually read this piece where companies like Google, Apple, Amazon, Dropbox, all these Fortune 500 tech companies, they physically spend time to seek architectural graduates which have that little bit of an X factor for their BD.
How interesting.
It's something that gave me confidence in going into business, thinking, well, all right, well, if that's what they're looking for, what was the actual underlying common factor there, which was actually the creative thinking. It's the ability to look at something that doesn't exist right now, pure imagination, and how do you implement that?
Definitely.
Right? So there's a lot of entrepreneurial skills there. There's a lot of 21st century skills there. So this is what got the ball rolling in terms of understanding, all right, there's something there. What was that? Right? So that's very similar to myself, where you slowly come into that awareness as you go on it. So in your opinion, do you think this applies to any industry?
Oh, absolutely. And as you've just alluded to, the fact that these Fortune 500 companies are, excited about that sort of thought process, I definitely think it's transferable. I think that, one of my good friends, actually, she's just recently started an automation business. And one of the challenges she's actually having is she's working with pet store owners and garden shops and a huge variety of companies, and they're really they're stale, for lack of a better term. They're used to their very linear approach. They're used to their processes and their routines, and the staff are used to that as well. And I think that one of her biggest challenges, which I do associate, is she's got this kind of creative thinking process happening with her automation business, and she's trying to put it into a business that's not operating like that. She's coming up against a lot of brick walls.
Of course.
But she, just like I can see so much potential in those businesses and what they could become if they were to adopt that. And so I think creative thinking and this sort of design thinking approach is important, not only across industries, but across the people within the different industries. Because unless you have buy-in from people across all levels of a company, you're still going to be faced with challenges, essentially.
Of course. And I think that's where a lot of the gaps are in certain companies, where it's not a top-down approach. There's leaders may be aware of it, but the staff are not, or vice versa. And there's no support from sometimes no support from the top down. So there's a lot of, I think, missing links, and until, like you said, it's a even playing field and everyone's got that buy-in, it doesn't have its potential utilized. And once it does, the capacity is endless. And this is what I see. One of the biggest advocates of that I am a fan of is Adobe, and Adobe's directors are doing the same thing that admin people are doing, the HR doing, and it's the same message carried across everything. It's beautiful to watch, actually. It's like a big engine that just works all the concepts. Exactly. I was in awe.
And I think that's probably why I was, going back to how I kind of ended up in a position where I was able to do that, is I was working with someone who was naturally, obviously she was an architect as well, and so she she naturally had this sort of design thinking, creative thinking approach operating behind her head, and she had crazy ideas sometimes, you know.
Sometimes that's a good
which
thing.
is sometimes a great thing. And she used to call me Negative Nelly because sometimes I'd bring her back into reality. And
You're
go,
the execution person.
I'm the execution person, so I've got to make this work.
Yep.
But it was good. She challenged me and I challenged her. But what I was going to say with that was because she was so open with her creative thinking and her design thinking approach to business, she was transparent with that.
Yep.
And then that also kind of, you know, engaged me, not only me, but the other people within the company. And we were all on the same page.
Yep.
And if we were going to do something, we were all committed to it. And we were all going to make it happen and we were all going to make it work.
Yep.
Whereas I think it would have been very different if, you know, you're battling half the team to actually get on board with it.
Oh, absolutely. There's a couple of companies that I've been approached to train their staff, and that was coming from their leadership. But until there was buy-in, there was actually no execution. So we went through the leadership training, but that was it.
Yeah,
it
ends there.
It ends there. There was no other further development in that company, and this is actually one of the biggest manufacturers in Australia, but there was no further buy-in from the rest of the company. So it was just a one-off workshop, and that's it. We walk away. So
it's a bit of a shame when you think about it.
It is. It's wasted time and I think wasted resources, but I think it's good that there's a lot of push, and this is actually one of the reasons that design thinking needs to be at a high school level and a university level across the board. What do you think? Do you think there's value in schools and educational institutes spending that time to embed design thinking in English and maths or science or anything? It doesn't really matter. Do you think that's a worthwhile effort looking at how your life went through?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that whether or not it's for just creative people or not, I think that exposing especially students who are, you know, in the prime of their absorbing information stage of life, I think even giving them that exposure and that opportunity to say, hey, is this something I like? You know, if it's not taught in schools, how often is this opportunity missed? And how often are people saying, I'll just continue on the path that I'm being told to do because that's what's shoved down my throat, or, you know, not necessarily shoved down your throat, but you know, it's a bit strong, but what's being exposed to me. So unless you're given the opportunity to think outside the box and think creatively and put yourself in someone else's shoes and to test ideas, then you're never going to challenge yourself either. So yeah, I think it's super important, and I think it's not only important at a high school or a student level, I think it's also important that it's continued and reiterated and supported, you know, whether or not you're through university or other sort of tertiary education, and even into the workplaces. You know, I think a lot of workplaces do want to create a good culture for their employees, and I think that, you know, reinforcing or even teaching some of this problem solving or this thinking approach would be hugely beneficial, and for people of all ages. Absolutely.
And I think that's what gives career flexibility to students or people such as ourselves, where now the average career change is, I think, 16 to 18 career changes. That's insane. And me and my brother actually sat a few weeks ago and we counted. He's much more methodical than I am, and I have 19. And it actually surprised myself that there was 19 career changes in this short amount of time, and my brother had, I think, 4 or 5. And obviously he's been in the industry way longer than I am. It's just different lifestyle. It's amazing to think that. And I think having that design thinking embedded in your approach gives you flexibility to go into everything. Whether that's like anything from serving customer service at a fast food restaurant to let's say leading a team and a BD role. So it's incredible.
So transferable. And you know, even for jobs that, or positions or businesses or services that aren't created yet, you know, unless you've got people challenging the norms and using that thinking, how are we ever going to progress as a society? And
this is actually funny, where we every time we do any training at a masterclass, we get teachers. We always have one group of teachers, usually the younger ones, that go and refuse to present their idea to the rest of the class. And when I ask them why, we've had 2 groups going, this is $1 million startup idea. And I said, well, that's sure. You feel free to do that. If you want to quit your teaching career and you know, pursue this startup, then by all means, but you still have to present. So And it's incredible when you ask them going, would you have come up with that solution if you didn't go through this approach? And they go, no, there's absolutely no way they could have. And they can't do it alone. They have to do it in collaborative environments, in experimenting, like you said, and right at the start of everything is empathy.
Yep.
Whether that's the customer, whether that's your team member. And I'm so glad that at such a young age, you've actually experienced that and found that out for yourself, almost by accident, but not really. It's intentional actions that's got you to this point. So it's amazing, and I'm so happy to see that.
Oh, thank you.
Now, I think one of the things that I want to ask is your advice. I ask this with all my guests on if they have any advice for speaker or the listeners. And the listeners are sometimes teachers, university professors, designers. I get a lot of students listening. So it's a mixed bag of professionals, but obviously design thinking is, I think, one of the cornerstones. Do you have any advice for people following or thinking about following on this same path, applying this thinking into other areas?
Definitely. I think that you have to, similar to what I said before, I think you have to find the opportunities, and I think you have to know when you've got a situation that you feel you could improve or you feel you could insert yourself into and make the most of it, and sort of identify those situations and go, yeah, I want to do something with this. I'm a firm believer that, everything happens for a reason, but I also believe that the actions, like what you said before, that you take create these situations. So if you're looking at getting into whether or not it's a business development role, find someone that's willing to support you. Find someone that's willing to encourage you and give you these opportunities and throw you in the deep end. And also challenge yourself, because I know that I couldn't have got to where I am without the support of other people. Nothing's done independently. So yeah, I would definitely just encourage people to make the most of any situation, and even if it's a glimmer of, maybe we could do something here, just step in, take the risk, go for it. You never know what's going to come over it. I'm a big fan of saying yes to everything, which sometimes is a problem. But as long as you can balance that with the occasional no, then then you're probably more likely to gain good out of it rather than the opposite.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much. I think that's valuable advice. And I think there are a lot of underlying messages from what you mentioned, is essentially finding mentors, finding that person that would support you, your support network. And the other thing was actually failing forward. So saying yes to everything, I think that's a great thing. I'm very similar. And sometimes it's a curse. But it always somehow leads to something incredible. And whether it is a failure is, I think, a perception. And if you're moving forward, taking the learnings, you have nothing to go wrong with.
I still to this day don't regret anything. And I've said no to very few things in my life. So
it's a happy life to live.
Happy life to live.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kaitlin, for your time.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for today, folks. But before we leave, I want to give a personal shout out to C-Top 1995 for your 5-star review. C-Top says, life-changing. Through the past 3 years of my design course, Roshan has been a fantastic mentor. It's great that through this podcast, others can learn about the power of design thinking and how it can be applied to all facets of life. Mate, I really appreciate your kind words and thank you for sharing the love. Hope you're kicking some fantastic goals as well. Keep up the good work. Everyone else, if you'd like to have your review read out across to listeners from over 14 countries, jump online to Apple Podcasts and share your love. I will make sure to read every review personally at the end of each episode. Last but not least, jump on to roshansenanayake.com/podcast for the show notes from today's episode and give a shout out to Kaitlin Sells. Till next time.